Everyone, it's Raina. So this video is about those people who have their Neptune in Capricorn. Neptune is a generational planet, so it has about a 15-year cycle, and therefore there are a lot of people who have the same Neptune sign. And in this particular case, it is from 1984 until the year 2000. So I wanted to check and see what were the years of the Millennials, and I found out that they were from the early 80s until the early 2000s, which I didn't know that. When you think of the millennium, I thought that they were born around the year 2000, but I knew that some of them were a lot older than that. So I was always a little bit confused about the actual years, and I didn't know that they were Generation Y. So I thought that was another generation after the millennials. But yeah, so anyway, I was looking at information online and I wasn't happy with any of it. So I'm going to just do this myself on the fly and see if people resonate with what I'm saying. I did suss out a little bit from the few things I read that I'm going to include, but it wasn't really anything that jumped out at me. So we have to talk about what the influence of Neptune is. Neptune is that inspirational, spiritual part of creative, imaginative, escapist, addictive, illusion, delusional, that kind of thing, deceitful. And so Capricorn is ruled by Saturn. So it's the ruler of the 10th house, which has to do with career, but also in general, we can say like the structures in society. So right now, as I record this, Pluto is almost through with its 15-year cycle through Capricorn. And these different structures in life, the government, the economy, healthcare, everything is crumbling. And that is a different story for a different day. Maybe sometime I'll do the Pluto influences of a generation, but just talking about what Capricorn is connected to via Saturn, its ruler. And so what we have is this combination of this imaginative, spiritual, illusory sometimes influence colliding with something that represents authority, structures. And how do they go together? Or do they clash? Well, people who have this is their influence as a generation. And how I think this manifests, as somebody who was in my teens and early 20s in the 80s, I saw firsthand what the 80s represented. And one of the key words I would say is materialism. Number 8 is a number of material wealth. But as often happens when a decade begins, you don't really get the vibe or the energy of that decade until several years into it, because at the beginning of the 80s, yeah, there was one of the things that was really big was like designer clothing, status symbol things. And that was kind of like going to hint at that materialistic decade. But there was a recession in the early 80s, and it wasn't until Ronald Reagan's second term, I'm American, so that's when I'm my vantage point, that Wall Street became that focus and that movie Wall Street came out in the years of Neptune in Capricorn, where the lead character said greed is good. And now that I think about it, when you connect this idea of Neptune being about spirituality with this Earth sign Capricorn that's concerned with status, you have somebody who may make their religion out of their ability to earn money. So they may make money their god. But it can go both ways. Well, not that it's going both ways. It can also be, to me, someone who may not want to have the typical church experience, but they might make nature their church. Crystals become, substitutes for some kind of like icons that you would, religious icons, in other words. So that can happen, but also being a science cultist, where the person thinks that matter is the only thing to believe in, and they get easily duped because Neptune can get duped by things, by the material. Another thing that I think is really important is talking about how this generation has dealt with all of these issues surrounding the material world. In the 80s, there were a lot of people pushing this idea of making money. And, obviously these the early millennials were babies and, toddlers and young children in the 80s. So they were not going out into the workplace. They would have gotten, let's see, how old would they have been when they graduated high school? Probably like early 2000s, right? Gosh, it's funny. 2002, I guess it would be. And when I think back to 2002, I remember after 9/11 that it was like, I don't think the economy has ever been the same in the United States. I remember seeing so many want ads before then, and then seeing virtually nothing. And we did have a recession in the early 2000s. And that would have been around the time that these early millennials, and I'm talking about the first waivers, I mean the first couple of years, would have turned 18, would have been, either deciding to go to college or getting some kind of job and not going to college. And so that's really interesting, because I wonder, like, those people who would now be close to 40, how they felt in those years, in the years like between 2002 and about 2006, when it seems like there was a lot of limitations when it came to jobs. And then, of course, we had another breakdown in 2007 or early 2008, and that was when Pluto entered Capricorn. And so the younger millennials who were born around 1989, 1990, who turned 18 then in the late 2000s. I'm curious, like, if you guys went to school, went to college, or if you just decided to get a job, because there was just a lot of restructuring at that time. And that wasn't necessarily something where people, or even people graduating from college in 2008. Yeah, again, the very first years of Generation Y, so 1984 to 1986, if you graduated from college right around the time when the economic collapse happened in around 2008, it would be interesting to know how you dealt with that. And I'm speaking especially to college graduates because you were given this, you were fed this illusion that, oh, yeah, there's going to be jobs for you after college. And even though I'm way older, I went back to college and I graduated. I got my bachelor's in December of 2007. And then the next month was the crash. So that was nice. But you know what? It was nice. You know why? Because it was something that dispelled the illusion of that old, worn out structure. And this is very, very important because the spiritual is something that is discounted by the material world on many different fronts. And this is where the Capricorn energy is really strong, is that sense of, what is real being gross matter. Anything else is suspect. So if you are somebody who is from that generation of Neptune and Capricorn, it would be interesting to know what is your relationship to money. Do you dream of making a lot of money? Or I think, because that was one of the sources said that, you dream of getting rich. That doesn't resonate with me. I think this generation actually has a kind of love-hate relationship with money from comments I've read online. And just even some of the people that I know personally who haven't necessarily had an easy go of it in terms of trying to establish themselves. It has been a struggle because as time has gone along, things have started to kind of unravel, little by little, and we can't count on things as we used to. But for later generations, this has been especially the case because they haven't really been able to experience how it used to be. And so they can only exist in this time when things have been actually quite inadequate in a lot of areas. And one of the things that I think happens with this generation is that they want this ideal. Maybe you want an ideal job. You're not going to settle for just the 9 to 5 grind and feel like that's good enough for you. Whereas past generations were satisfied with that because, of course, it goes into their conditioning, like the Great Depression, causing a lot of material lack. And then World War II, there was a lot of resources that were not available for many years in a consistent way, that kind of thing. So, when the late 40s and the 50s came along, people were very open to embracing materialism because it was such a, nice change of pace from feeling like there wasn't enough. And I think what happened in the generation that began in the mid 80s is that because of the emphasis on materialism, parents began to give their children a lot more material goods. And in some cases, I think this happened because you had both parents working, children may have been in daycare, and they didn't have as much time with their children, and they tried to use material goods to make up for that. And so that may have even created some of the illusion about what material objects can actually do. Can they make a person happy or not? And of course, I don't think that they can, but there was just a lot of conspicuous consumption, and that was supposed to make up for working long hours, being away from the children, and not having that traditional life, which was more slow paced, more family oriented. And that brings up another thing, because Capricorn represents the father, and Neptune in Capricorn to me can be the absence of the father, the idealization of an absent father. Neptune can lead to delusions or illusions about the father. So single parent families where the mother is heading up the family and the father is not there. And what kind of impact does that have? Well, I think, the 80s was actually a big, probably until the early 90s, but this is during this generation of a lot of gang involvement and activity. And I feel like it was, I think that these things are orchestrated on many fronts. And one of the things is this idea of the masculinization, I can't say it, of young males, in a pack, gang is a pack, is a substitute family, and trying to figure out how to be men, and that the violence substituting for, or maybe even acting out some of the sadness and not feeling that kind of connection that they might not have had with a father or a strong father figure, because Neptune can be kind of like to me, a weakness. And so even if there is a father, the father is not a strong father. The father is deceitful. The father is addicted, or something is wrong with the father, mentally ill. So these kinds of things, they acted in tandem to produce certain other qualities. And I'm very interested in exploring some of the influences, like Pluto, for instance, and how that affected the generations, because that is like the shadow. And that should be very interesting as well. And I think like the law of attraction, which actually, it's the law of attraction is nothing new. It's just been repackaged, and actually past this generation, I think it really came into popularity. But before the first time I really heard about it was in the mid 2000s, or even the latter portion of the 2000s. And the Neptune in Capricorn ended in 2000. But I do believe that a lot of the pre-law of attraction stuff was still focused on, abundance and prosperity, because I was hearing about that long ago, maybe like the 90s and things like that. And they just called it something else back then, abundance, teachings, or what have you. And I think that this makes millennials actually very good manifestors if they choose to do so, because there is this very psychic link with material energy. And actually, I wished I could have remembered somebody, one of the sites had a great phrase, and I can't remember what it was. But yeah, I just think that Generation Y, if they harnessed it, that they can just really do well with it and still have an idealistic way of managing material energy. Because, the idea of minimalism, that really does go along with Capricorn. Um, Saturn is very Spartan. And so idealizing Spartan living, like, living very sparsely, what used to be called, before minimalism, they called it simple living. And it was like, not having to have a lot of things, not having to obligate yourself with a lot of bills so that you could have more time to do what you wanted to do. All of these things are connected. And because the millennials right now, the older ones, are pushing 40, they really are in positions of authority, because this is when people come into their personal power in the material world. And so they're shaping policy, they're involved with things in a prominent way. They can make the government more, it's like spiritualizing the government, making it more sensitive to all beings, and caring for all beings. And, in every aspect of society, Neptune is very intuitive and creative, and getting away from those harsher influences. And of course, Capricorn can be quite hard, certainly, but with Neptune, it gets softened. Okay, that's what I have for you. I hope that this resonated. I'd like to hear your thoughts and your experiences if you are a member of this generation, or if you have children who are millennials, and what you have experienced with them and their ability to navigate the material world. I'd love to hear from you. If you'd like a personal reading, the link is below. Take care. Bye.